Hello everyone, and welcome to my week 4 power rankings video for the UBA season 2. It's like all the rest of these videos, just going to be my opinions on how the teams rank currently as of week 4, or in the case of 2 of the teams week 5, because they decided to get their battle done early. But let's get right into it. I do not know how to scroll. At number 11 we have Kudo. He did pick up a win last week against D Winchell, but that was a really messy game from both sides. I think. And this week he ended up forfeiting his game due to scheduling issues. So not much to say in terms of this week and what he did, but I had him ranked number 10 before, and with D Winchell below him, and I'm moving D Winchell up this week, so he was going to fall regardless of whether he played or not this week, unless he did very well. But yeah, so I have no reason to move him up, and I have a reason to move D Winchell above him, so he's going to move down. So at number 10 I have Flair. Flair played me this week, and I don't think played particularly well. And he just didn't really impress me with prep or play. It just didn't seem like he had any breakers that really effectively could break through my team, or any game plan to break down my team. And during play, he didn't really do anything to really force me into bad situations. I was able to just switch into checks and then kill things. I probably could have even gotten more differential if I decided to play the game a bit riskier, but I decided to just play the game super safe. But I think that it could have been more like a 4 or 5-0 had I decided to go for it. But yeah, Flair just did not impress me this week and did not prep or play particularly well. So I'm moving him down one spot to number 10. So at number 9 I have Enzo, who's moving down one spot. He got beat pretty badly by D Winchell this week. So he did beat me last week, and he did play very well there. So he was looking very good as of last week, but it seems that it could be, like I said last week, I need to see him continue to perform well to keep moving him up after playing well last week, and this week he did not deliver. He didn't prep or play particularly well, I don't think, and D Winchell was just kind of able to manhandle him. So I don't know if he just didn't play well this week, or if the last week when he beat me was more of just a fluke week from him, but he's going to need to have more consistent performances for me to move him up. He just did not bring the proper threats to bring down D Winchell's team, and he I don't know, felt most of his offensive things were a bit preemptive, or I don't know, done without scouting. He didn't scout for Akibia on Florges and tried to set up very early with the Haxorus. He assumed Aerodactyl had no bulk. I can't remember if there was a way for him to tell at that point whether Aerodactyl had bulk or not, but he was caught off guard by that. It seemed just more like, instead of having a proper win condition that game, or a method of winning the game, he just brought out a bunch of offensive stuff and then just kind of tried to win individually with each given piece of offense and hope it worked out, and it just didn't end up working out. So I'd like to see more organized team building and prep, more of a game plan from him to really try and win games. And I just didn't see it this game. So at number 8, moving up giant 3 spots, is D Winchell, and I was really impressed with D Winchell this week. He beat Enzo very hard. He had defensive answers for pretty much everything Enzo tried to throw at him, and he just overwhelmed Enzo quite easily. I think he made a minor misplay by leaving Arrow in on the obvious priority move from Hitmonchan. And it didn't really matter in the context of the battle, but it did. He could have saved a differential point there. So I think that's a minor misplay from there, but he obviously won the game 4-0, which is quite commanding. So, yeah, very solid prep and play. I was very impressed by D. Winchell, and if he keeps it up, you can see myself moving him up even higher. So yeah, that's it for D. Winchell. Number 7, I have Jeff, who lost to Jolty this week, and I don't think he played particularly badly or prepped particularly badly against Jolty. I think it was a very close game. It definitely could have gone either way. Jolty did crit straight through his Slowbro, which did end up not even having EVs on it, so I don't know how I feel about that, because like on one hand he prepped a Slowbro to beat the Zygarde, and he was missing that key component on his team, which could have made the battle much closer. But on the other hand, you should be punished for being careless when building your team and not checking to make sure you have your EVs on. It shows that your team was a bit rushed, or you didn't take the time to check things through. But the crit on the Slowbro is pretty unfortunate for him, and the Volcarona still almost swept through in the end. I can't remember what the sleep turns were on for Cresselia, but if it was later, I'd have to check back to see how many sleep turns Cresselia was on when it toxicked his Volcarona. But if it was kind of earlier in the sleep turns, then he had a very good shot of winning the game. And Jolty made a pretty whack play of clicking 1,000 arrows against the plus 1 Volk. That's just not a play. You don't do that. You won the game 100% if you extreme speeded and put yourself in a really bad or like a position to possibly lose it if you didn't. There's just no reason to make that play. I just don't think it was ever worth the risk. But I guess he did. So yeah, I don't think he played particularly badly, but Jolty did just outplay him, and I do rank Jolty very highly as a player, so I'm not going to punish Jeff too much for this loss. But like I said, it's kind of earlier in rankings when he was 2-0. He was playing. His 2 wins were against where were they? Kudo and Enzo, who are 2 teams I ranked below him. So I said he's going to need to prove himself against stronger teams before I start moving him up. And since then, he's lost to Flare and Jolty, which really has not impressed me. So he's going to need to start to pick up more wins against stronger teams for me to move him up. Otherwise, he'll have to keep descending as he has been. So number 6, I have Classiel, who took the forfeit win this week. Just like Kudo, not much to say about him. Him going down 1 spot isn't him moving down, but rather Hazy moving up and me needing to make room for him. So I still rate Classy about the middle of the pack right now. If he can start pulling off some wins against higher ranked teams, then he'll move up, and if he falters against lower ranked teams, then I'll have to move him down, but until then I have him in the middle of the pack. So next up I have Hazy, who is very strange this season. He has 2 wins, and both of them were against the coaches who were ranked number 1 at their time, at the time of him winning, with Tepig and Pita, beating both of them in extremely close games. But he also lost quite hard to Reggie and quite hard to... Who else did he lose to? Oh, Classiel. So... He's in a really weird scenario where he's beating all the teams above him and losing to the teams below him. Or Reggie wasn't below him, but... Or in my rankings, but... Yeah, it's really strange to rank him. I think we're going to need to see more games to get a better sample set here, but like he did beat the 2 highest ranked teams, and so like you can't just win off of luck twice against high ranked teams, but he also played pretty poorly and lost versus 2 lower ranked teams. To be fair to him, he did, like I say, last power rankings, have probably the hardest schedule up until this point. He hasn't played any of these teams who are in the bottom like 6 here. So once he starts to play them, if he's able to start picking up wins against them, then he can really start to make his position in the league a bit more solidified, but he's kind of an enigma till then. So I have him at number 5 because he does have the ability to beat higher end players, which Cassiel, Jeff, D. Winchell all have shown they don't have. But he'll need to really pick up his consistency to get up with anyone higher, I think. Next up I have Pita, who's dropped 3 spots from the number 1 spot this week because he played two games. The first one versus Hazy, and the second one versus Reggie, and he lost them both. So that set him back quite a bit. Against Hazy, he played the game well for the most part. I think he definitely should have kept his Gudra around. He let his Gudra go down just before the end game kind of began to start. And with the threat of Scarf Energy Ball looming, I really feel that he should have kept the Gudra around, and probably identified earlier on that the Lottie was Scarf, because it seemed he didn't know, and it was probably quite obvious because it wasn't changing its moves, probably based off the damage calcs he could tell as well, but also it just made a lot of sense because it's the only thing on Hazy's team that could outrun a Swampert under Rain. So I think he probably should have identified it was a Scarf Lottie earlier and really been more aware. Probably kept his Gudra around for that threat of Scarf Energy Ball instead of letting it go down. And he also went hard into Coco, which I do believe was a roll to get 2 KO'd, but it was in Pita's favor to survive 2 energy balls, so he definitely should have also kept that around, just as a way to eat an energy ball and then return and kill the Lottie, because evidently going hard into it made it so that it could only return with 1 Dazzle, which ended up being fatal for Pita. So I think he could have managed his threats a bit better in the end game by kind of considering what Hazy had. Against Reggie, it was a weird game. Reggie's answers to Hawlucha were very limited, and it turned out his Incineroar with the Chople Berry was his main one, which ended up getting the job done, or at least being able to put it in range of a +1 quick attack. It turned out that that the quick attack, I think it was not a roll. I can't even remember. It was either not a roll and always killed, or is in Pita's favor, or in Reggie's favor. But Pita, I feel like Pita isn't super familiar with some concepts of counter team building, because he probably should have been able to identify before the game began that it was going to be an Adamant Pinsir, because if you looked at the matchup, there's no reason for the Pinsir to not be Adamant, because it always outran it. Could never outrun the Cinccino, and his next fastest thing was Chandelure. So there's no reason for him to be Jolly if he can be Adamant and still outrun all of the threats he was going to outrun anyways. And on the same coin, I feel that he could have put a lot more bulk into his Hawlucha, because there really wasn't anything relevant that was going to be outrunning it. And if he wasn't planning on using it outside of the outside of an Unburden boost anyways, then he probably should just gear it to outrun Reggie's fastest Scarfer. And had he done that, he probably would have been able to at least put the roll more favorable from that quick attack, make that roll much more in his favor. Because the amount of HP he had was just the standard Smogon set, which, I mean, it could just be a coincidence, but he when Reggie asked for his amount of HP afterwards, it was the exact standard Smogon set, and that's more geared to an OU metagame where certain threats exist, but within a counter team metagame, you're going to only have to outrun certain threats, because other threats that Hawlucha in OU is worried about and outrunning aren't existing here. There's only 11? I believe it's 11. 11 given threats on Reggie's team that you needed to be ready for. And if you geared yourself to outspeed all of them, then you could have been more efficient with your EVs. So, correct me if I'm wrong, PETA, but I think that was just a standard Smogon set for Hawlucha, and you could have geared it better to possibly live that. So yeah, he just didn't prep as well as he could have to beat Reggie. I don't think there was anything better he could do in terms of play. He really wasn't ready for Incineroar, and Reggie did a good job of abusing his terrain against him with Thunder Punches and Thunders from Magneton, doing massive damage to his team. And it just seemed like a lot of threats that Reggie brought that PETA wasn't really ready for. And although the Hawlucha had a good matchup and almost pulled it through, it wasn't enough to break through the Incineroar plus the Pinsir with the quick attack. So yeah. PETA is kind of coming back down to earth this week. I'm not sure who he's playing next week, but if he's able to rebound and continue on to his old form, he can definitely still stay in the top half of the league, and I still think he should be able to make playoffs this season. Next up, I have Jolty. Jolty was kind of a wild card for me at this point, because up until this point, he beat Enzo and Flare, and then lost to Tepig, which puts him in anywhere in the middle of the pack of where he could be, because he beat Enzo and Flare, who aren't particularly high ranked, but he also lost to Tepig, which is to be expected because he's also probably the hottest coach in the league right now. But so he really could have been anywhere, but he did beat Jeff. I wouldn't say dominantly. It was a close game, but he definitely won and outplayed him. So yeah, he kind of solidified his position a bit higher through that win. He played well. Maybe a bit more fat for that matchup, and kind of like sitting around and stalling and kind of not knowing. Jolty does have a tendency to just kind of sit around with his fat in front of the other team and kind of just like switch between things and wear things down just by sitting around, which I think higher end coaches can abuse, especially people like Tepik who were able to beat him, although Jolty did make it close. So yeah, he just solidified his spot a bit higher in the rankings by beating a more mid-range coach, which he hadn't done up until this point. Now I have him above PETA, but just because he has a better record, and he's impressed me a bit more than PETA, because PETA hasn't, his past 2 weeks have not been a good showing. But Jolty and PETA I consider pretty close in rankings, and maybe even Hazy Basilisk for that matter. They're all pretty close, and they're going to have to kind of show me who's ahead in that pack in the coming weeks. But I have all three of these teams rated fairly closely right now, so they'll have to kind of differentiate themselves in the coming weeks. At number 2, I have Reggie. Reggie played and prepped fairly well for PETA. I would have liked to seen a Finny or something more reliable coming for that Hawlucha, because it was really sketchy to check it with that Incineroar. Had it come in, had PETA brought in Hawlucha earlier against something that wasn't a double down, so that he couldn't bring in Incineroar and intimidate it immediately, then Reggie was in a really bad spot, because he wouldn't have taken that Thunder Punch. He would have SD'd, come in, he would have got the +1, he could have high jump kicked it, and then killed it, and then he wouldn't have been in quick attack range, and Hawlucha probably would have won. So I think he really under-prepped for the Hawlucha. I think Finny or something could have... He needed to preserve health and have a much more solid answer than Incineroar to beat the Hawlucha. He did come out with a win. I think if PETA set up a bit earlier with the Hawlucha, he could have forced a worse situation for Reggie and definitely come out with the game. But other than the under prep for Hawlucha, I feel that Reggie did prep and play very well this game. Like I said last week, I didn't watch his game against Tepig very hard because it was the week before and I forgot to, or it was a week ahead and I forgot to, but I went back and watched it more thoroughly for this week, and I do feel that Reggie could have definitely prepped for that game a lot better. With the massive threat of Lopunny on the other side, he needed to do better to get ready for it, and he didn't bring anything that outran it besides like a Vanillux, which gets chipped by rocks and can get hit by priority fairly easily from the Lopunny, especially when it's taking rocks damage. And his best switch-in was a Finny, but he didn't put leftovers or any mode of recovery on it, and played it very carelessly and let it go down much earlier in the game, making Lop have no switch-ins, and so Lop just started coming in and taking a life every single time it came in. So I think he really should have preserved his Finny much better that game, and brought something more threatening like a Scarf Nidoking or something to force out the Lopunny, but at the same time apply pressure and be hard to switch into, which Nidoking is incredibly good at being. So I didn't really like his prep and play against Tepig, but he did prep and play very well against PETA. I do have a problem with his prep for Hawlucha, but other than that, it was fine, and he's been very consistent so far in the league. He has a loss to D-Wind-Chill, but as we went over before, it was mostly the hacks. I do think his prep wasn't that good for that game, but that is a loss to hacks. And the only person he's lost to is Tepig, who's ranked above him. So I have him about here. If he can, I'll pretty much be keeping him here just because he's shown to be more consistent and beaten more high-end teams than people like Jolty, PETA, and Hazy have. But if he falters against any given one of them, then I might have to start moving Reggie down. But until that happens, I'm keeping him here. Especially in the case of Jolty. Jolty hasn't really... The best team Jolty's beaten it so far is Jeff, which was a good win, but Reggie's beaten PETA and Hazy, which are much higher end wins than Jolty. So that's why I have him at number 2. Lastly, I have Tepig, and Tepig has just been playing and prepping very well. He does have the Lop, which is very, very powerful, and he's been using it really to its fullest. I think it's in the lead for the kill leaderboard right now. And yeah, he's just been using it very well. Reggie last week, as I said before with him, didn't play particularly well around it, which kind of led it to really destroy his team. But I have no reason to really move Tepig because he's been the most consistent. He's beat Jolty, he beat Reggie, which are 2 of my highest ranked teams. So I'm kind of forced to put him at number 1. He did lose to Hazy, but that can kind of be drawn down more to a fluke because he has shown consistency against other high-end teams, and I really just don't have a better candidate than Tepig for number 1 right now. So yeah, those are all my rankings, and I'll see you next week.